The Western Conference Finals are down to a best of three after the San Antonio Spurs even the series with the Oklahoma City Thunder on Sunday, with the Spurs winning in a blowout by 21 points. Welcome back to another episode of Small Market Bias. Let's go ahead and jump into this game, first reviewing the story of the game. So let's first talk about who was in and who was out of this game. So for the Spurs, they had their entire lineup available. For the Thunder, they were missing Ajay Mitchell, who was out due to injury, and then Jalen Williams was ruled out before the game. I saw him warming up before the game. I was on there in San Antonio covering the game live. J-Dub was warming up, but like I said, a few minutes after he went back to the locker room, the Thunder released their injury report, and J-Dub was officially ruled out. So two key members, two starters for the Thunder were out, in J-Dub and Ajay Mitchell. And well, this game came down to who could play the best defense, and that was the San Antonio Spurs. That's really what this game came down to. Let's go through a quick story of the game. So in the first quarter, the Spurs set the tone on defense, really pressuring the Thunder ball handlers, not making anything easy. One thing we already saw right from the get-go is that the Spurs were willing to just play one-on-one defense, mostly on SJ with a little bit of help backside, but they weren't using that trapping scheme, that doubling, assertiveness that they were using in the prior two games, which didn't allow OKC to have a lot of those open threes. And then the Spurs, by shrinking the floor more so, the Thunder role players really struggled. And so the Spurs set the tone early, outscoring OKC 28-19 in the first quarter. For a long segment of the first quarter, the Thunder were just stuck at 8 points, and all those 8 points were scored by Isaiah Hartenstein, who made 4 floaters early on. But after that, they could not score for so many minutes. The Spurs actually used a 16-0 run to actually build a 15-point lead in the first, and then again, they were ahead by 9 points going into the second quarter. In the second quarter, it was again more lockdown defense by the Spurs, once again holding the Thunder to 19 points in that quarter. Wemby, got the game going right at halftime. He ends up making a half-court buzzer beater to put the Spurs up by 12 going into the halftime. Then in the third quarter, it was Spurs again, outscoring the Thunder 28-22. They used a 15-6 run to end up going up by as many as 25 points, which is the most anyone has led by in the series. And it was the largest lead, like I mentioned. And so now the Spurs are comfortably going into the fourth quarter, leading by 18 points. In the fourth, it was pretty much all Spurs. Their lead was over 20 points. Once again, they held the Thunder to just 22 in the fourth. And really, the Thunder didn't bring back a lot of their starters. SGA never came back into the fourth. Most of the starters for the Thunder sat out that quarter. Even the Spurs starters were checked out pretty early. And so both coaches allowed the reserves to close out the game. The Spurs, like I said, won comfortably on their home floor by 21 points. And again, this series, now that San Antonio has evened it up at 2-2, it's about who can win 2 of the next 3. That's all this comes down to for a bid to go to the NBA Finals. So both teams are just 2 wins away. So now let's shift over to, like I said, it was the best defense of the season for the Spurs, both season and playoffs. And you'll see why with some of these numbers. So for one, they held the Thunder below 25 points in all 4 quarters of the game. That's the first time they've done that to anyone in the playoffs. In 2 quarters, OKC was held below 20 points. Like I said, the first and second quarter, just 19 points. And before that, they had only held OKC below 20 in 1 quarter of this series. The Thunder scored just 82 points overall. That is both a Spurs opponent playoff low and even regular season low. So again, this is why I say this is the best defense of the season, was this game 4 output by the Spurs, because they held the Thunder to just 82 points. And what can we say about the Spurs being perfect when doing that, holding an opponent below 100? In the playoff, they are now 6-0 when holding an opponent below 100, and they were 11-0 during the regular season when doing that. So what do we say? During this 25-26 season, this Spurs team is 17-0 when they hold an opponent below 100 points. OKC made just 6 threes, again, 6 threes, which is a playoff low for a Spurs opponent. They shot just 18% from outside. What was the final number? Yikes, 6 of 33. That 18% is both a regular season and playoff low for a Spurs opponent. Now, I want to talk about the kind of threes they got. So like I mentioned, a lot of the Spurs defense was just staying on SGA one-on-one, switching up top, and and then providing some backside help, but never like throwing those half-court traps at him, which allowed the Thunder role players to get going in Game 3. And so that meant that the Spurs got to stay home on more of the OKC reserve shooters, And that meant that they didn't get as many open looks. They were getting a lot of contested threes. And then by the second half, they started to get a few more open looks, but their confidence was completely gone considering they were down by like 20 plus points. I mean, nobody shot well from three for the Thunder, who Kason Wallace, 1 of 3. The rest, he was the only starter who made a 3. Jared McCain, 0 of 5. Jalen Williams, J-Will, who lit up the Spurs, 4 of 5. Last time he went 1 of 7. Alex Caruso, who's been making all these threes, looks like Stephen Curry shooting the ball in these playoffs. He had 0 3-point attempts. He only took 1 shot overall in the game and scored 0 points. Who else had a rough night? Kenrich Williams, okay. He went 2 of 4. Aaron Wiggins, he got more minutes with the 2 guards out, so he went 0 of 4. And then even Isaiah Joe, 2 of 7. So like I said, everyone on the Thunders really struggled from 3. Part of it, too, was a Spurs game plan, just really increasing the pressure and shrinking the floor for them, getting out in good rotations, contesting. The paint was shut off for OKC. They only scored 36 paint points, which was very low for them, 44% paint accuracy, which shows Wemby's defense, the Spurs defense hounding inside on top of Luke Cornett coming in off the bench. The Spurs did a much better job of keeping the Thunder off the free throw line. OKC only made 16 free throws, which is basically the Spurs season average, so they will take that. SGA, he did make 7 free throws, but again, it wasn't a lot. He made up the majority of those free throws for OKC. Spurs transition defense was excellent. Thunder only scored 7 fast break points. The Spurs, here's how you can tell how active they were on defense. They kind of gave the Thunder their own medicine, which is what OKC likes to do, is pressure teams, turn them over, get going on the other side. Listen to these numbers for the Spurs on their defensive end. They forced the Thunder into 11. I mean, they got 11 steals on the Thunder. They forced OKC into 20 turnovers. 20 turnovers is a lot for that Thunder team that really takes care of the ball. And then the Spurs got out and scored on the other 25 points off Thunder turnovers. So like I said, it's like they gave the Thunder their own medicine, is what OKC normally does to teams, on the average night. And then, of course, the Spurs were deterring at the rim. 10 blocks, and it wasn't just Wemby. Yes, Wemby had a team-high 3 blocks, but then listen to these numbers. Devin Vassell, 1 block. Julian Champagnie, 1 block. Stephon Castle, 1 block. De'Aaron Fox, 1 block. That basically means every single starter on the Spurs had a block. Who has 2 here? Luke Cornett, 2 blocks off the bench. Carter Bryant, 1 block. So, like I said, 10 blocks as a team for the Spurs. When I even look at all their numbers, honestly, I can't even say there was a negative. I would just say I couldn't find a negative, honestly. It was just a superb defensive game for the Spurs, both their game plan of not really throwing those traps at SGA. And then, as I'm about to talk about the Thunder players here, they really missed J-Dub and AJ Mitchell. So let's look at, there was only 4 players who I guess you could say stood out for the Thunder, and I'm going by their game score metric. SGA, he had a game score of 13.8, which is basically above average. It's not like well above average. It wasn't an all-star night. So listen to his night here. He ends up with 19 points on the night, 6 of 15 shooting, 7 free throws, only went 0 of 1 from 3, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 turnovers. The Spurs, different defenders were switching onto him. A lot of Stephon Castle on him. Then there would be Dylan Harper. There would be Devin Vassell, Julian Champagnie, De'Aaron Fox. Even Wemby was switching out onto SGA at times. And that's one thing the Spurs wanted to do. They were okay living with SGA trying to beat them one-on-one and just providing some backside help, but they weren't going to throw that trapping action, that doubling action that put them out of the rotations and let the other Thunder players get going. So we see that SGA just couldn't get there. Even to some of his spots, he was 6 of 15 from the floor, 4 turnovers. The Spurs really pressured him well. Honestly, it reminded me a lot of what Anthony Edwards looked like against the Spurs defense at times, and also Denny Avdia, where they were just locking those players down, and then the other players just didn't have anywhere to go on the other end. I mean, that's why I say anytime SGA wasn't involved, he was trying to create everything for the Thunder. And so you could just tell they were missing J-Dub being able to break down the Spurs defense as a second ball handler. They were missing AJ Mitchell as well, because a lot of those other guys are more spot-up shooters. Kason Wallace, Lou Dort, who else they got out there? Caruso, Chet Holmgren, Isaiah Joe. A lot of those guys, they're not comfortable breaking apart a defense in the pick and roll, especially the best defense, coming into this series in the Spurs. That's really tough for them. So like I said, SGA had like an okay night, but again, there was a lot on his shoulders, and so that's why it's really critical that they get one of at least AJ Mitchell or J-Dub back soon. The Thunder, statistically, Isaiah Joe had barely an above average game at 10.9. What was his line here? Isaiah Joe, 11 points in the night, 4 of 9 shooting, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. Yeah, so kind of like, okay, like that's it though. Like everyone else, like I said, on the Thunder struggled. Kason Wallace, 5 points as a starter, 2 of 8 shooting the ball. Chet, I mean, there was a part, I think it was the third quarter, where Chet finally scored 10 points, and I put laugh out loud just because it's like, come on, dude, you're their second All-Star. Like, how can you not help out SGA in this kind of a game? And so Chet, yeah, I mean, like, what do you do? 10 points, 3 of 8 shooting from the floor, 9 rebounds, did 3 turnovers, 1 block. Hardenstein, after scoring 12 points, I think either all in the first quarter or just a little bit more in the second, he never scored again in the game. Victor was able to do a little bit more, as I'll talk about Victor's game on offense against Hardenstein. He also had 7 rebounds. Hardenstein did 1 turnover. Lou Dort, I mean, just hasn't been involved at all offensively in the series. 2 points, only went 0-1 from 3. McCain, who's been playing really well off the bench, had a really rough game. 4 points. 1 of 10 shooting, 0 of 5 from 3. How many? 2 turnovers. Yeah, just 2 rebounds. J-Will, 3 points, 1 of 7 shooting. Caruso, 0 points, 0 of 1 shooting, 4 personal fouls. Who else here? Kenrich Williams got a lot of minutes, 10 points, 3 of 7 shooting. So like I said, they just didn't have anything. Aaron Wiggins really hasn't played in the series, and he got a lot of minutes tonight. He got 21 minutes, goes 4 points, 2 of 11 shooting the ball. And then, like I said, Isaiah Joe is okay. So, yeah, the SGA just had no help in this game. And you know, the Spurs really, their pressure, the Thunder role players just did not look comfortable with this scheme the Spurs used of really staying one-on-one with SGA, not letting those other players get going. And so, yeah, I think it is critical that they get J-Dub or Mitchell, one of those players, back to try to help break down the Spurs defense on the secondary action. And then here's just a good sign for the Spurs that they were closer in the bench scoring battle. We've been talking about how OKC's been, you know, winning the bench points every game. Part of that was because Harper came off the bench early on in those first 2 games, but now that Harper's back, the Thunder only won the bench scoring battle 34-30. So again, that's how much closer it was for the Spurs bench. They were doing a little bit better, as I'll talk about here. So now, before we go into the offense for the Spurs, where it was a struggle, let's first take a break. All right, so now let's move on to the offense. And so what I'm calling this segment is it's basically whoever could get to 100 points. Because even though, you know, the Spurs did so well on defense, you know, like I said, the best probably defensive game of their season, it wasn't the same story on offense. They still had their struggles against this OKC defense, but they got enough points on the scoreboard to win this game comfortably on the night. So let's look at some positives on offense. For one, the Spurs are now 7-0 when leading by 20 points in the playoffs. So again, they built that 20-point lead. They held on to it pretty well in the second half. They made 24 free throws. So in a very gritty game, you know, more physical, low-scoring game, you need to get to the free throw line, and they did a great job there. 24 free throws. But as I'm going to talk about in a little bit, their accuracy was actually very concerning. They got 14 offensive boards, the Spurs. They were attacking the offensive glass, which makes sense considering they shot 39% from the floor as a team. They did a great job again of holding onto the ball. Just 13 turnovers as a team. Stephon Castle, give him credit here, just 1 turnover again. So we're seeing here now that ever since Fox and Harper got back onto the court with Castle, Castle's only had 1 turnover in each of the last 2 games, considering he had 20 in the first 2 combined. So again, Castle's really done well. And honestly, the 3 guards together, what was the turnover count? So Fox 0 turnovers, Castle 1 turnover, Harper 2 turnovers. So that's not bad. The 3 ball handlers, just 3 of the 13 turnovers for San Antonio. The Spurs, by getting all these stops against OKC, you know, forcing steals and then also just running off all the misses, they had 18 fast break points, which is a little bit more compared to what they've been getting against the Thunder defense. 20% of their possessions came in transition, according to Cleaning the Glass, the Spurs, which is in the 80th percentile. So that shows that they were able to get out and run. And not only that, even though the Spurs didn't shoot efficiently inside the paint, they actually were attacking Oklahoma City more, because the last few games, it seemed like OKC's kind of dictated that, where they wanted the Spurs to shoot a bunch of threes, and now the Spurs were attacking them inside. 53% of the Spurs shots came to the paint, which is the most in the series for San Antonio, and just 37% from three-point line, which is a little bit less than compared to what they've been shooting in terms of frequency of shots here against the Thunder. Now, there were quite a few negatives on offense for the Spurs. Like I said, it wasn't like, you know, an excellent offensive game. They only made 9 threes, so, you know, just like the Thunder struggled to shoot from 3, while the Spurs did 2. 9 made threes as a team, 27% from outside. Vassell went 2 of 4. Julian Sheppenny, it almost looks like his confidence has gone a little bit. He went 0 of 5 from 3. There was several times when he would just pass up open looks and start driving inside, and that's a sign that his confidence may be shaken a little bit. Wemby went 3 of 7, you know, including that half-court heave. Stephon Castle 1 of 3, Fox 1 of 2. Who else? Keldon 0 of 4. I'm just looking at the high volume shooters. No one's really a high volume shooter right now. So, I mean, even on offense for the Spurs, that's still, you know, a concern going into Game 5 is where's that 3-point shooting going to come from? The Spurs only scored 50 paint points and just finished 52% of their shots. So even though they went into the paint a lot more, the Thunder defense, Hartenstein, Chet, they still deterred a lot of shots there inside the paint. Jay Will as well. The Spurs, they were lucky this was not a close game because, in a way, this free throw accuracy could have came back to haunt them. They shot just 24 of 32 from the foul line, 75%. So like I said, because they won by 21, it wasn't a big deal tonight. But had this game been closer, it could have been something that really haunted them, San Antonio. And then, of course, the mid-range hasn't been there for the Spurs all series. They don't take a lot of shots from here, just 2 points, 11% accuracy from mid-range. And like I said, they barely got over 100 points with 103 on the night, but it was enough to win this game because of the outstanding defense by San Antonio. Let's look at some standout players. Wemby went off here, a game score of 28, which is second best here in the series. And so this is obviously his second best performance since game one. He ends up with, let's look at his line here. 33 points on the night, 11 of 22 shooting, 50%, 3 of 7 from outside, got to the free throw line, driving inside, 8 of 9 from the foul line, 8 rebounds, 3 on the offensive glass, 5 assists, finding his teammates, 2 steals, 4 turnovers, and 3 blocks. And one thing I want to note about Wemby is that he was making more of an effort to go inside, whether that was driving the ball, whether that was him being ready for alley-oop lobs. He had 3 alley-oop finishes, which is his most so far against the Thunder defense. And he scored 14 points right at the rim, which is his second most since that game one opener where he had 24 points. But that's a good sign that he's actually getting more scoring at the rim. Like I said, either rolling or cutting or just himself kind of taking it inside and trying to finish. He did a few more of those attempts where like he just throw. He knows he's probably not going to make the first shot, so he would kind of just launch it at, like near the backboard at the rim, and then he get his offensive rebound for a putback. And what helped him out, minutes wise, because the Spurs were up by so much, he only had to play 31 minutes in the game. He pretty much sat out most of the fourth quarter. So that's a good sign, is that he got a lot of rest in this game, only having to play 31 minutes in a blowout. Devin Vassell, who's been excellent for the Spurs in this series, ends up with a game score of 13.5, which is basically like above average for him. What does he end up with in the night? 13 points, 3 of 7 shooting, 6 rebounds, attacking the boards, 3 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, 1 turnover. So again, Vassell had a good game. There was a starter, Fox, starting again, even though he's injured with that high ankle sprain. He ends up with 12 points, not a great shooting night, 5 of 13, 10 rebounds, which is a playoff high for him, 10 rebounds for Fox. 8 on the defensive glass, 5 assists, finding his teammates, 1 steal, 1 block, no turnover. So again, Fox, despite being hobbled right now, it was pretty good here. He was asked after the game if getting a win at least makes him feel a little bit better. The ankle, he said no, that does not change his pain threshold. That he's still feeling it out there. Every possession that he's out there on the floor. And then Stephon Castle had an above average game, 11.9 game score. What was his line looking like? 13 points, 5 of 11 shooting. Only got to the free throw line twice. 3 rebounds, 6 assists. I think all of Wemby's lobs were pretty much by Castle. 5 fouls, but again, you have to consider he was playing a lot more one-on-one defense on SGA, really contesting him, making him try to earn his shots or his points. 1 steal, 1 turnover, 1 block for Castle, who had a pretty good night. And then in a low-scoring game, who else is out there? Yeah, I kind of went to all the double-digit scores, but at least everyone made a few buckets here for the Spurs. It wasn't a great night, like I said, offensively, but Dylan Harper throws in 7 points. Keldon Johnson didn't. Oh, yikes! Keldon 3 of 12 shooting the ball. He ends up having 6 points. Cornette, had 3 had an alley-oop finish, had some putback layups and dunks, some 6 points off the bench. So yeah, they just got a little bit of score from everywhere. Even though he didn't really impact the stat line scoring-wise, Harrison Barnes was big. 5 points, most of those all of those from the free throw line, but just his energy, his hustle on both ends of the floor, that could really be seen. I honestly wonder if Barnes or Carter Bryant were shooting the ball better, would they be the starter right now? Moving into Julian Champagne's place since he's struggling, but because they're not shooting quite so well either from outside or bringing as much offensively, I think that Julian will continue to keep his spot out there in the starting lineup. So I think that Julian just needs to get a few makes to go in. Once he sees that ball start going in, I think he'll be more comfortable shooting the 3 ball again and kind of get back to his usual levels. But right now in this series, he's finally kind of hit a shooting slump, considering he was actually one of the better shooters on the team against Portland and against Minnesota. But now in this OKC series, it's kind of hit him that shooting slump. But again, it wasn't a great night on offense for the Spurs, but they did enough. Outside of Wemby, and Wemby had a great night offensively, obviously, with the all-star level performance here. But everyone else, pretty much struggled on offense. But again, because of just how excellent the Spurs defense was, it was enough to get a win. These next numbers are just more of an indicator, I think, of what you can just tell how the Spurs were more desperate in this game. They didn't want to go down 3-1 going back to OKC for game 5. They really wanted to even the series. And here's where you can see that number. It's called the extra possessions battle. The Spurs won this area by 10 extra possessions. So the Spurs were crashing the offensive glass, 14 offensive boards, plus how active they were on defense, forcing the Thunder into 20 turnovers, meant that the Spurs got 34 extra possessions. On the flip side, the Thunder got 11 offensive boards, but they only forced the Spurs into 13 turnovers, so their defense wasn't impacting San Antonio as much with their pressure defense, and so they only had 24 extra possessions. So again, the Spurs were a plus 10 in the extra possessions battle. Now, as we look ahead to Game 5 on Tuesday, where it's going to shift back to Oklahoma City, this is basically the most pivotal game. I think this is going to be the one that determines the series. Obviously, Oklahoma City still has home court because they have 2 of the next 3, if it goes that long, in Oklahoma City. So Game 5 will be on Tuesday, and of course, this is a tight series. I think that if the Spurs win it, then all of a sudden they can wrap this up in 6, San Antonio. But if the Thunder win it, when now the Spurs are on their heels, having to try to win Game 6 to keep it alive, the series, and then Oklahoma City would have Game 7 in OKC if that's the circumstance. So some of the key questions I have for the Thunder is, what is the status for J-Dub and Ajay Mitchell? I really think they need one of those guys back at least to have a chance of beating the Spurs in Game 5. What adjustments are the Thunder now going to make, now that they know the Spurs aren't trapping SGA anymore, and, they're really staying on their role players. They're just going to play one-on-one defense with SGA with some backside help. What adjustments will their coaching staff think of to work up? And, is it just as simple as getting one of those extra ball handlers back in either Ajay Mitchell or J-Dub? I'm also wondering for the Spurs side, can Champagnie kind of get out of the shooting slump? I think if he sees 1 or 2 go in Game 5, I think that could, maybe break him out of this streak where he's really struggling shooting the ball from outside. And like I said, there's not really any great options to replace him there, in the starting lineup. If maybe Harrison Barnes was shooting better, or Carter Bryant was getting more minutes and showing a little bit more offensively, maybe one of those players could come in. But right now, it doesn't look like that's the case. And then just to note that because the Spurs won game number 4, we will definitely have a Game 6, and that's going to be on Thursday in San Antonio. So, like I said, it's a best of 3 going forward. We will see what happens in Game 5 on Tuesday in Oklahoma City. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.